And I don't think that Donald Trump has been bad for our democracy. He made America stronger.
I don't think that President Trump is the one who caused all the hatred, but I think he's been a vehicle for it to rise to the highest level of our government.
Welcome to Khanversations. I'm your host, Muqtedar Khan. Today, we are going to do the second in a series on the midterm elections for November 2022. Today, we have two distinguished statesmen from the state of Delaware. I have with us the Honorable Judge Brady, who is here in her avatar as the chairman of the Republican Party of Delaware. I also have with us a second timer, Senator Bryan Townsend, who is now the number 2 person in the Senate, if I'm not mistaken, and continues to be a rising star in the progressive side of the Democratic Party. We are going to start very simply by asking this question. The legislative season just ended, Senator Townsend. Are you happy with what happened? And can you list briefly for us what the major achievements have been? Delaware is one of the few places in the world which is like a one-party state.
Thank you very much for having us, Professor. It's always an honor to be here. There certainly were accomplishments to be very proud of in the past 2 years of the General Assembly, both ones that I think Democrats can be proud of and ones that both parties can be proud of on issues that we could agree, including infrastructure and certain other kinds of investments, mental health resources. But when it comes to issues like women's rights and women's equality, particularly with regard to women's right to choose, as well as gun safety, something that people of all parties are crying out for elected officials to have more courage and to take more steps to try to ensure safety in our communities and safety in our schools, Democrats stepped up to the plate here in Delaware. I would say that across the country, there are a few instances of states in which Democrats hold both chambers as well as the governorship. And there are several instances of states where Republicans hold both chambers and the governorship. So your framing of one party rule is not all that uncommon overall. But in Delaware, I think that a combination of steps that we took that both sides could agree on were important. And then steps that unfortunately none of our Republican colleagues really agree with us, but we were able to build the coalitions in the community in advance. So there's always more to do. Housing is one issue that the legislature did not step up on, but it's so fundamental to a stable community, a safe community, a good economy. So we've got to do more work in that area in particular. But there was a lot to be proud of and to continue working on from the past 2 years.
Jane Brady, you just wrote a paper saying rescue Delaware, a plan to rescue Delaware, implying that the state of Delaware deserves or at least needs to be rescued. Can you please tell us what the Republican position is on these achievements in the state of Delaware, and what are the key elements of your rescue Delaware plan, like the alternative directions in which you think our state should go?
What Senator Townsend left out is that in the last 2 years, we have had a surplus of $1 billion, that's with a B, $1 billion each year. And the legislature has done nothing to return that money to people and families who are really hurting right now with the inflation and gas prices. They offered no reprieve for small businesses from the tax burden of a gross receipts tax, which is a tax you pay on the amount you sell on the register before you have any profit and pay taxes on the profit. It's a regressive tax, and we should have repealed it. He did not mention what some people have touted, and that is election reform. They passed 2 bills that are unconstitutional and are being challenged in the courts right now. And I have no problem if the legislature passes an election integrity law that I disagree with properly and constitutionally. My ideas lose, theirs win. But they tried for 4 years to get a constitutional amendment passed to allow for mail-in voting. And when they couldn't do that, they simply passed a statute and said, we don't know if it's constitutional, we'll let the courts decide. To me, that's an abdication of their responsibility to their constituents.
But Judge Brady, didn't they just send out checks of $300 each for every citizen of the state of Delaware who paid taxes? Isn't that giving us back some of the surplus?
That is not going to help the problem. It's like what the federal government did with the $600 or the $2,000, whatever checks you got from the federal government. It's to everybody without regard to where it can best help the economy in Delaware flourish better. It isn't targeted and it wasn't thought out clearly. They did it as a political trick to try and make everybody happy. I don't think it's going to work for them. People are upset. No reprieve from the gas tax. We had enough money in the surplus to cover any depletion of the sales tax on gas that would go into the transportation fund and give every person who has to drive to work and to support their family a bit of a break on the gas. And we didn't do that. The legislature just did what I say is a political gimmick.
Bryan, do you have a response to that?
Certainly. It wasn't a gimmick at all. I think in terms of the gas tax holiday, which we saw, I believe, Maryland institute early on, we took a look at that, and the way that our bonding is, the language of our bonds, our transportation bonds, doesn't allow us to just do gas tax holidays because the revenues from the gas tax are pledged towards our bonds. So our conclusion was we weren't able to just do a gas tax holiday. Additionally, it's interesting that Chairwoman Brady says it's a political gimmick because essentially all four caucuses came together. Two Republican caucuses, two Democratic caucuses came together on the rebate checks. In fact, Republicans had made some early announcements at a much lower level with regard to the amount of the checks, but they had started, just as Democrats were starting to talk about the idea of how to try to put some money back in the hands of Delawareans. So the idea that it's a one-party political gimmick is just absolutely counterfactual to how it had rolled out. And to the issue of election integrity and voting rights, I mean, Democrats are certainly proud to want people to have the right to vote and to be able to vote as safely and as easily as possible. It is true that for several years we tried to do it through a constitutional amendment, and I'll say one of the more shocking instances of partisanship, and I think in some ways cravenness ultimately that I've seen in my 10 years down in Dover, was when you had almost every Republican, if not every Republican, vote for no excuse absentee voting back in 2020 prior to the elections. And then coming out of 2020, when you had to vote on it again to make it a constitutional amendment, Republicans in Delaware, very sadly, very, very sadly, basically bought into the big lie. And they all wouldn't vote for a constitutional amendment for no excuse absentee voting as part of the kind of national flavor under former President Trump. It was very unfortunate, very sad. And with additional research, we were able to find that there are states that have taken the path that we have now taken in terms of putting forward voting rights that doesn't have to be through a constitutional amendment. Now, if we're wrong about that, then certainly the courts will let us know. And the Chairwoman Brady talked about, and she characterized it as us being indifferent somehow to the constitutionality of something, and the courts will strike it. I don't think we're indifferent whatsoever, but obviously the courts have a key role in our system of government, so they will weigh in on the legislation in due course. In fact, this legislation just prevailed last week. A TRO was denied in a lawsuit challenging vote by mail. So we are advancing election access for people in a very prudent way. It's what the broader community wants to see. And we're not going to say no to that kind of progress just because a few individuals are choosing to buy into this falsehood of election fraud across the country. So those are just a few of the responses I guess I'd have overall to Chairwoman Brady. But it is good that we can talk about different perspectives on how things are going in Dover.
Well, thanks to Khanversations, we have an opportunity to talk about this. So that gives me an opportunity to ask my viewers to subscribe to the channel. Chairman Brady, you had a comment to make?
Yeah, well, first of all, they could have encumbered a portion of that $1 billion and given the people who have to drive to work needed relief, and they didn't do that. They could have encumbered a portion of that $1 billion. We figured out the amount of money that would be used based on past gas usage, and it was well within the $1 billion. It was only millions. The second thing is that temporary restraining order that he referenced, the TRO, with regard to voting, is only because the court expects to get to the merits of the case by the end of this month and didn't see the need for something on an interim basis in between now and oral argument on that motion, August 30th or 31st. So I think the other thing, after they passed that first leg of the constitutional amendment, I began educating Republicans. It was not a no excuse absentee ballot bill. The language that they used to amend the Constitution would have taken every restriction about voting out of the Constitution and put it in the hands of the legislature. And since they're in the majority, I'm sure they would love that. But it could have been easily, based on the authority the legislature would have had after that amendment, it could have easily been the mail a ballot to every registered voter without asking bill. There was no restriction on what the legislature could do, and the Republicans couldn't stop anything. And I began educating Republicans on what that bill could really mean. And it was a no excuse absentee bill in sheep's clothing. It was a vote, everybody can vote with a ballot without even asking.
But I mean, besides the integrity and the nuts and bolts of this particular debate, I think we need to reflect on this one issue that our democracy is the oldest functioning democracy on earth. We've been doing this for more than 200 years, and 200 years later, still we are struggling to ensure that the basic mechanism of democracy, which is voting, is conducted with integrity. I want to move beyond this, and I start with you, Chairman Brady. My first question to you is about the midterm elections. What do you think are going to be the critical drivers of the coming midterm elections in November? This election is, at least for a lot of people, feel very critical. People on the right feel that the country is going in a direction they don't want it to, and so this election becomes very critical. For Democrats, this is also a very critical midterm elections, because if they lose either the House or the Senate, then President Biden's next 2 years will become he'll become a lame duck president. So what do you think are the 3 or 4 critical issues from the perspective of the GOP coming midterm elections?
I think the policies of this administration and some of the failures of this administration have created new segments that are going to vote Republican. Baby formula, Afghanistan, and what happened there. Gas prices and inflation. I think the economy is going to be the biggest overriding issue nationally, but I also think there are segments, education for Latino and Asian families are going to be a huge issue, as well as for other families, but it's particularly those two. We are finding those two ethnicities are very concerned about education. Baby formula, we're going to get suburban moms back. They're realizing that these supply chain problems all started with this administration, and they're going to blame the Democrats, whether the Democrats think it's really them or not. When we talk to people and look at the polling, the inflationary nature of the economy, the gas prices, the education system, and the baby formula are big issues. The IRS, recently the IRS was authorized in this new bill that just passed that was supposed to reduce inflation but increase the size of government immensely. They more than doubled the number of agents. A few months ago, I read with interest that the IRS had just ordered a whole bunch of weapons. Recently, they advertised a job a description of a person people they're looking to hire that required the willingness to shoot to kill if necessary. This is the weaponization of our government against the people, about money that they squander every day. It's just remarkable to me. And I think this IRS issue, which is just surfacing, is going to have an impact as well.
Bryan, what do you think are the major drivers of the coming midterm elections? And a few weeks ago, the Democrats were a bit despondent with President Biden's approval ratings, but a couple of things, the passing of the Inflation Reduction Bill, as well as the vote in Kansas on women's reproductive rights should be indicators of optimism for Democrats.
Well, I think certainly the result in Kansas is reason to think that the election can go better for Democrats than people have been thinking for many months. It's a little hard for me to use the word optimism, given the overall situation that we're in with the Supreme Court decision that for the first time in our country's history took away constitutional rights. And then to see the results in Kansas which shocked everyone with how supportive people in Kansas were, even having voted for Donald Trump heavily, are still rejected the idea of taking away a woman's right to choose from their constitution. Just to see the next 2 or 3 days play out after that result, and to see Republicans from across the country walk back their harsh anti-women rhetoric, anti-choice rhetoric. They're purely trying to grapple with how they should talk about their failure to support a woman's right to choose in a way to minimize their electoral harm come November. So we'll see how that works out for them. But it's kind of hard in that context for me to use the word optimism. But yes, the results from Kansas, I think, indicate that Democrats might do better in November than people had thought previously. As you said, inflation is coming down, and some of the supply chain issues are working themselves out. Both, I think, with some involvement from the federal government, but to some extent, there are things the federal government can't do, and it's more of a global and international trade type issue. So I think there between some of the legislative success in Washington D.C., again without Republican support of some of these key initiatives, was seeing another summer of horrible weather events. I mean, tragic flooding in Kentucky. Wildfires raging in the West. I mean, other places that are going through massive heat waves. I do think that the commitment to the environment is something that's going to also play out in the elections differently than people might think. And then we'll just see what former President Trump's what his ongoing rhetoric, his ongoing efforts, and then the recent FBI involvement. I mean, really, again, it's stunning to see Republicans now all of a sudden targeting the FBI, targeting FBI agents. I mean, it really is sad. The party that talks about law and order is anything but, and has been for a while now, but it's really coming to very, very dangerous heads. And it's one thing for President Biden to try and be a leader and try to work through different points of view in his own party, right? Where the Democrats are a very diverse party, not only demographically, but also in terms of political views. But the Republicans for several years now have not been a party that tries to sort through any diverse feelings or diverse views any kind of responsible way. It's all in. It's all in on the big lie. It's all in on President Trump. Now it's time to hate the FBI. It's time to do insightful rhetoric January 6th. It's just a stunning time in U.S. history. So you've got legitimate policy issues working themselves out against this very stunning and troubling rhetoric and action. We'll see how that comes together in November. But I do think that voters, both in Delaware and across the country, if Kansas is any kind of indicator, it shows that voters can tell the difference. And I'm hopeful then that election results, whether it's Democrats winning or reasonable Republicans winning, that people who care about governing and care about getting it right and care about our form of government and why the form is that way and the balance of powers and all those things, hopefully prevail in November, and we can get back to a country that's more likely to live up to its potential.
Pundits often say that while Democrats know how to govern, they have a problem with messaging, and that's why they often tend to lose. But I wanted to ask you about this perception, at least among the punditry, that while the Dobson case, the reversal of Roe versus Wade by the Supreme Court, may have mobilized voters for the Democratic Party and could actually be the vehicle that might save the midterm for them, this FBI raid on Mar-a-Lago might have the same effect for Republicans. Rather than marginalizing Donald Trump from politics, it has made him front and center. Again, today, everybody's talking more about Donald Trump than Biden or anything else. And this perception that the Democrats, either through January 6 hearings or through FBI, are targeting Donald Trump because they're afraid of him and his popularity in the country. Will this actually mobilize the Republicans to come and vote, and unless he's arrested before November, even if it happens after November, if there's some fault found with him taking away classified documents, it might still hurt the Democrats. Don't you think so, Bryan?
It could, but I think that the issue with politics versus the rule of law is one where you shouldn't just let politics, win over. If it's a political issue, to try and actually enforce the rule of law. So there's no doubt that President Trump, while in office, and I think even after office, has acted in ways that are just unprecedented in our country, unprecedented disrespect and degradation of basic institutions and principles that are supposed to support them. So, of course, there might be things like an unprecedented raid to uncover documents that he unlawfully took, and who knows what they say. I'm not expecting the director of the FBI or even the president of the United States to get on TV and try to message a law enforcement act based on a lawfully issued warrant in a political way. I just don't think that's what it should be done. It shouldn't have been done under Director Comey back in 2016, and it shouldn't be done now. But there is something to say for the public needing to understand how its government's operating. And so I hope as quickly as possible, within the confines of responsible decision-making by law enforcement, there can be information put out to the public with regard to exactly what they were searching for and what they did find and what it means. But Donald Trump is, he's a stain on our country's history. He continues to be a stain on our country's present. And there might not be a way through law enforcement to keep him off the ballot, nor should that be the goal of law enforcement. The goal should be upholding the rule of law. And if he broke the law, he should be held to account. What the Republicans now are saying about the FBI is shocking. It's unacceptable. And I just pray for the safety of law enforcement officials who are trying to do their job, and hope that things go as safely as possible while we sort out this legal processes.
You know, you talk about political rhetoric. And extreme political rhetoric. No Republican blamed the Democrats for all the attacks on the pregnancy centers that help women make choices so they have children instead of killing their babies. No Republican has blamed Democrats for that. And yet you say Republicans are threatening law enforcement and the FBI. The bottom line is there are people who act inappropriately all the time. And I don't know anyone in this state, and no one who has talked to me, and nothing I have read of my Republican colleagues that says there are threatening FBI agents. There have been the calls raised, that concerns raised about that, but they are not from Republicans. They're from people who are who are threatening to break the law, and they should be arrested if they break the law. And you know that's my entire career. I don't defend it, but we don't blame the Democrat Party. Republicans don't stand up and say Democrats are defiling places and threatening people who are trying to save their children and go to a pregnancy center. And you shouldn't blame Republicans for challenging the FBI. Further, there is reason and cause for concern about the FBI based on the inconsistencies in how they have acted. You know, Hillary Clinton had confidential documents, high clearance documents, top secret documents that she shared with other people that were on Weiner's laptop, that were in her bathroom server in the wall. She hid things, she broke things, she disregarded subpoenas, and nothing was done. And when you have a dispute about whether certain papers are going to be turned over, and you conduct a raid on a former president's house, when every president has a presidential library, and there may be a dispute about some documents, that is an outrageous example of the conflict between how the FBI should comport itself and how it has differently with regard to different people.
Well, I think it's worth noting real quick that a Trump-appointed director of the FBI made a decision in coordination with a Trump-appointed judge who had to sign off on the warrant. So this isn't sort of like partisan politics. And there is an irony there if Republicans want to criticize what happened when Republican leaders who I think are committed to trying to get the government right are the ones making those decisions. I'll also say that I invite Professor Khan, as part of the graphics he can throw up after this session to air this video, to feel free to put up examples of tweets from Republican leaders, elected officials, or Republican candidates running for office that are in fact using extremely insightful language or inciting language with regard to actions against the FBI and its agents. So they're out there, they're among candidates or leading Republicans. And again, it's sort of the sad situation we're in our country now that's going to take time to sort through. I don't think that President Trump is the one who caused all the hatred, but I think he's been a vehicle for it to rise to the highest level of our government. Thankfully, that, at least for the moment, is in our past, not part of our present, but clearly there's still this ongoing degradation of faith in our government institutions, even ones that are complying with legal processes. So yes, I appreciate your service in law enforcement over the years, but the idea that a director of the FBI with a lawfully issued federal a search warrant, noted both by Trump appointees, it would be subject to the kind of criticism that has been leveled in a very hateful way the past few days, and even now on this video leveled in a very sort of beyond skeptical type approach. I think is extremely damaging to our country.
I'm challenging the legal authority of any of those individuals. What I'm challenging is their judgment and their discretion and how they exercised it. You know, you can go in guns blazing, 30 agents, and take a stolen vase from an antique shop if you want to. You have the authority. The question is, how should our government comport itself? And I don't think it comported itself very well because of the conflict and the contradiction, it has raised concerns. I would prefer we could have faith in all our institutions. I still have faith in our institutions, but many people I talk to do not because of the inconsistencies, and that's what I raise.
I have a question. Thank you for making me irrelevant to my own show for a while, but it was a good exchange. I want it. I don't want to do this, but it seems to be that we end up always talking about Donald Trump, and I do want to ask you, Chair Brady, that since Donald Trump has come to the fore in the politics, hasn't our democracy become weaker? Today, half of Americans feel that every election that we have had in the past 3 major elections have been unfair elections or wrong elections. Elections have been stolen, and so on. So we are undermining our own democracy. We are bad-mouthing our own democracy. We are questioning our own legitimacy. And also this shadow of Donald Trump on the Republican Party, which has forced Republicans who care about this country and who would like to see this acrimonious division in the country to disappear, are even afraid to speak up because of this powerful influence that Donald Trump seems to have on a core segment of the Republican Party. Do you really think Donald Trump is good for the United States, Chairman Brady?
Okay, let's go back to your premise about challenging elections. Since Gore v. Bush, every loser has challenged the legitimacy of the winner. Donald Trump didn't invent this. Hillary Clinton called him illegitimate before he called Joe Biden didn't win. And you go all the way back, really, to Gore and Bush. And every loser has challenged the legitimacy of the winner. And it's not something that Donald Trump or the Republicans invented. In fact, the Democrats were the losers in the Bush-Gore race. So I don't think that Donald Trump is a factor in that, in generating that. I think that there are many people who agree vehemently with Donald Trump's policies who don't agree with his manner and style. And I talked to a number of people who say, I had to make a choice. Do I want these policies or those policies? And they want a border, and they want strong education, and they want women's sports to be allowed to be for women. They want a strong economy. They want energy independence. They want a strong leader. And I don't think that Donald Trump has been bad for our democracy. He made America stronger. And to say that he's a stain on this country, when in fact, more people were working for more money in more different ethnic groups than ever before, tells the whole story about what he did to lift everyone up. His work with the Second Chance Act, he was a compassionate man. People don't see that. You really think what's happening at the border is compassionate? Babies being dropped over the fence and left to die, children being abandoned in the desert, farmers finding dead people in their fields because they've been left behind, truckloads of people suffocating. I mean, there is nothing compassionate about our border policy now. It is creating a whole group of people who are living under a shadow of gray, illegal status in this country. And so I believe that the people, many people, the reason they voted for Trump was not Trump's personality. It was not his rhetoric. It was his policies. And those policies made our institution stronger, not weaker.
Senator Townsend, I'm sure you would like to respond to that, but I'm going to present a question to you. You can respond to that and also maybe the question itself. One of the things that Democrats are struggling with in this current election season is the extremely low approval ratings of President Biden. They have been languishing in the 30s. I checked today on Real Clear Politics, it was 39 approval and nearly 56 or 57% disapproval rating. And there is already talk about among Democrats that perhaps President Biden should not consider rerunning in 2024. In fact, when Senator Joe Manchin was explicitly asked, would he support a second term by Joe Biden, he simply refused to answer the question. Do you think that, will there be an impact of President Biden's low approval ratings on the midterm elections going forward? And how will the Democrats bring the progressives and the young people back into the fold who are so critical in Biden's victory in 2020?
Well, I think it's important not to govern religiously by polls. Polls can change over time, and I expect that the numbers you're referring to will be changing as people are able to see the results in the recent couple of weeks legislatively in a variety of ways in Washington, D.C., including the Inflation Reduction Act and all of its commitment to trying to combat climate change, again, passed only with Democratic votes, not with Republican votes in the Senate. So we'll see what those poll numbers look like. There's no doubt that it's historically true that the midterm elections do not favor the party that has the presidency. There's no doubt that if President Biden does not have very good poll numbers, it doesn't. I don't think it's a direct sort of. I think that reflects sentiment in the public more broadly. I don't think it's sort of people go to the polls and they think, oh, well, President Biden has low numbers, I will not vote for President Biden's party. I think it's just it's more of a correlation to things that are going on, not like a causation. And so we'll see what happens in the coming weeks and months. Again, Kansas, the results there shocked the people, and I think really kind of setting the stage for a different approach to campaigning, even by Republicans on that issue, right? Republicans have been touting the Dobbs decision, and now are in some ways trying to not run away from it, of course, but to try and reframe it a little bit. So there's gonna be a lot that's different come November, between now and November, than what people have been thinking the past few weeks. We'll see what that means in terms of driving different poll results and where the poll results already might be different right now. And with regards to President Biden running again, I think everyone's committed to getting through these the midterms here and seeing where the country is, and seeing where President Biden is, and seeing where the issues are. There's no doubt that it's historic in terms of his age and being a candidate and continuing to serve as president. It doesn't mean he's not qualified. But it's historic, and figuring out how the country feels about that and how it all sorts itself out is an important thing. I think anyone that's rushing to judgment one way or the other is probably not focused on what we need to be focusing on right now. More broadly, I would say to Chairwoman Brady's comments, I'm not a historian, but I don't recall the 2004 Kerry v. Bush election, the 2008 McCain v. Obama election, the 2012 Romney v. Obama election with any kind of challenges as to integrity of the election or election results that she had referred. She basically said that every loser is always challenged for the best bunch of years. And no, I think that President Trump, when he became president and how he campaigned, obviously prior to that, and also as he served in office, brought a distrust in election results from certain parts of the electorate to a whole new level. And we did see an unprecedented involvement of foreign actors in our election in 2016. And people wanted to deny that, as other people maybe wanted to mischaracterize it in ways that maybe weren't supported by evidence. So I think there's, as you know, Professor, it takes years and years sometimes to truly understand what has happened, what's happening right now. But I think I do have to push back on the idea that this is just the same old type of fighting between two political parties. No, this has reached a whole new level of toxicity, a whole new level of potential violence with regards to calling for overthrowing. I mean, January 6th, 2021, whole new level of what we've seen. And even that, thankfully in Delaware, I think unanimously, the Republicans voted with the Democrats to condemn what happened on January 6th. But that hasn't been true across the country. And that's just one example. FBI situation now is another example of just how people are suddenly willing to change how they talk about issues and talk about basic pillars of our government, all in a seeming fidelity to one person in terms of Donald Trump. So I think that our entire country will be better off when the parties can get back to focusing on issues and disagreeing with each other more respectfully than the toxicity that Donald Trump and others, as well have brought to the debates.
The four things that the Democrats have achieved in the last 2 years I'm going to list them out to you. One is the infrastructure bill, which was passed very early on, and then the gun bills, the first significant legislation on some kind of restraints on access of guns in this country. And then the manufacturing bill, the critical strategic manufacturing bill, which was just passed, and the coming inflation reduction bill. So these are the four bills. Now, the question to you, Bryan, is, and then I will come to Chairman Brady to comment on this. While these touch critical issues, are these enough to carry the Democrats through in November? When I talk to some women activists, one of the questions that they have asked is that Democrats have had ample opportunity in the past to codify Roe versus Wade, and they did not do that. And so what happened with the Dobson case was essentially to opportunities missed by the Democrats. And there is also the perception that President Biden was slow to act as a response and has not done enough on it. So these are some of, even though these are achievements, they are not making everybody in the party or in the country happy.
And so I wasn't sure if there's a question. I'll comment on that generally, I guess, is that it goes back to something I said previously about the Democrats being a bigger tent party with diverse views and the difficulty of sorting that out. It also relates back to a question, your most immediately preceding question. I didn't answer part of it by accident. You had asked what we could do to kind of bring younger people back into the fold. I think that the Inflation Reduction Act and its dedication of resources to fighting climate change is a big part of that. But I think it's really important for us to engage all aspects of our party and try to talk about what it is we're trying to do and why, and have people then say, well, that's the group I want to vote for. That's the candidate I want to vote for. It's the party I want to vote for. At least you're trying to get it right. At least you're trying to do your best. So I think that to your example about whether President Biden was or wasn't vocal enough in the wake of the Dobbs decision or leading up to the Dobbs decision, given that there had been the leak of the draft opinion, it's certainly something for people to think about how they feel personally. And what that does. I don't think it means that people won't vote, who care about women's rights, won't vote for Democrats. I think it's absolutely fair for them to say, let's look at example A, B, and C of how that rolled out and why did it look that way? We wish it looked this different way. That's completely fair. But when it comes down to actually voting for candidates or a party that's committed to women's rights, I think they're going to be there. And I think that Kansas has already shown a reason why this is going to be a much more live issue than people have given it credit for. And I do appreciate the Republicans in Kansas who, of course, much like Republicans who are interviewed in any kind of context, are not going out and criticizing Donald Trump. It almost never happens among Republicans. The few Congress people who have done it are most of them are losing primaries, I think, or at least several of them are losing primaries. I mean, it's a party of Donald Trump right now. There's no denying that. But the fact is, when going into the safety of the voting booth to be able to cast your vote and express your opinion, express your wishes, people are saying we are rejecting what the Republicans are doing in so many different ways. And so I do have faith. I don't think we should take voters for granted. We should never take them for granted. We should never take issues for granted, solutions for granted. We've got to work hard. But I think if you do it in the way that actually shows a commitment to trying to sort out these complicated issues, the voters are far more likely to be with you, no matter what people on TV are saying. So I think that's how we're approaching this.
Chair Brady, one thing about Kansas, which was critical, is that Roe versus Wade or women's reproductive rights were actually on the ballot. There was a constitutional amendment there, which means people had to vote on it, and that could have been a mobilizing factor. I'm assuming that there won't be any explicit thing to vote on in November. So my question to you is, from the Republican perspective, is this election going to be about how America is treating Donald Trump or mistreating Donald Trump, or are Republicans going to offer an agenda which is different from that of the Biden administration and the Democratic Party? And if there is an alternative agenda, what are the issues that are going to excite the Republicans? There is a possibility that the Republicans might think, the other party always wins, and that might actually dampen voter turnout for the Republicans because they might assume they're going to win anyway. And one last question about this issue: do you think the Republicans will brag about the fact that they were able to reverse Roe versus Wade in their campaign going forward?
So I think pro-life advocates don't brag about it, they're grateful for it. And that's how they feel. And you talk about diverse views. I've had to bring together people who said, I'll never vote for a Republican again because you didn't support President Trump after the 2020 election. And others who said, I will never give money to the party again because you supported President Trump. And I had to bring those people together in Delaware to try and get our Republican candidates elected. So people, we have a very great wide variation of views within the Republican Party. We are the party, I think, becoming the party of the working family. And that's a real large consensus centrist group of people. I think that most people in this country believe that there are times when an individual, a woman, might want or need to seek an abortion. There may be circumstances. And so I don't think that a blanket prohibition without exceptions for some reasons would ever prevail overwhelmingly. I think that the Supreme Court, it wasn't Republicans who did this, it was the Supreme Court who did this. And what they said was it never should have been of constitutional proportion. There's nothing in the Constitution that would allow us to have ruled on this. It should be done by the states. Well, what better vehicle than the government that's closer to the people rather than the courts? The people's representatives are going to vote what the people say they want. It is the best way to reflect our morals and values and what we think is important, rather than have it done by a court or nationally. So I think that Roe versus Wade is going to motivate Democrats because of the rhetoric, but that no one who supports the life movement is going to brag. They're grateful that they now have the opportunity to perhaps save more babies. When it comes to the first part of your question, I think that Republicans are very motivated. They know that we are going in the wrong direction. We're going down on energy independence. We're depleting our reserves that are supposed to be for us and sending them out to other countries. We're begging enemies for oil when we're standing on our own 2 feet with it right below our soil. We so flubbed Afghanistan, and we hurt the whole region. We had allies there we didn't give enough notice to. They were left caught short. We left Americans behind after the president promised we would not. There's not a veteran I've talked to who's going to vote Democrat this year. We have the education system where the Department of Justice has been targeting parents as equivalent of terrorists who want their children to learn academic subjects and not be indoctrinated into a socialist ideology that is shared only by a small portion of our country and not the majority view. We have seen so many instances where people have been alienated by an effort on the part of this administration to reach out and be the most progressive, is their own words, President Biden's own words, most progressive. And they have left behind the majority of the country. And they're going to hear that in the midterms.
Let's assume that we found the Aladdin's lamp, which if you rub gives you wishes. So I will start with you, Chairman Brady. What are the 3 things that you would wish? Don't forget the practicality and achievability of these wishes. But what are the 3 things that you would wish for America?
I would wish for civility and unity in support of our traditional values. I would wish for common sense and reason. My mother had a saying, wishing doesn't make it so. And that comes to whether you're a boy or a girl or how you identify in gender. It comes with so many things, having enough energy to go electric, having means to go electric. That wishing doesn't make it so. I wish our policies were more based in reality. And I wish for the success of our leadership, whoever they may be, in making this America stronger. We are a leader in the world. When you see what happens in Afghanistan, when you see what's happening with South America right now, and Africa, and the erosion of economies because of choices made about fertilizer and nonsensical decisions that aren't ready. The world and the practical physical science are not ready for. I wish for a good guidance to our leaders, because as we lead, the world is also affected, and we have not had good leadership this past couple of years.
Bryan, if you found the lamp and you had 3 wishes for America, what would they be?
I think certainly one would be, I wish that our leaders would be dedicated to solving the problems that everyday Americans face. I think that whether it's because of certain issues like gerrymandering or disproportionate representation, that's just dramatically more than the founders ever anticipated in small population states. I think our system is not working the way it truly intended, and that's causing all kinds of problems in terms of our failure as an overall, both parties to be able to meet the needs of people. I think Democrats are trying to do that with regard to climate change, with regard to families and what they're going through, and not just caving to big money or to big business. But some of that flavor is on both sides of the aisle, and I think it needs to stop. I would wish to a commitment to, and this is sort of, some of these are going to be related, but a commitment to sort of like data and science and not in a sort of esoteric, kind of smarter, holier than thou perspective, but just not be divorced from the reality, whether it's the reality that working families are going through or the reality of what medical experts are telling us, whether that relates to a historic pandemic that was utterly flubbed by President Trump in the response to it, and denying and encouraging people to engage in very risky and ultimately self-destructive and community-destructive behavior, whether it relates to the science on the issue of choice and not having sort of political talking points be what drives people's decisions on these things. In fact, what we've seen in the wake of the Dobbs decision and some of the Republicans walking back their previous and sort of unwavering commitment to taking away women's right to choose is that when you realize what that does to women who are going through complications in pregnancy, what it puts at risk for mothers and for babies, and you cannot approach things from a medical perspective, you get horrific and tragic results. And so you've seen medical professionals actually get involved in politics in ways they hadn't before, I think, to say, wait a minute, you politicians, you really, really are getting this wrong. So I think a commitment to the idea of expertise and understanding issues, and that can come, through formal high education or not through formal high education. Expertise comes in a variety of ways, but when we shun it and ridicule it, we're inviting dramatically bad results for our country and indeed our world. And I'll say that'd be my third wish, is that the United States for the past several decades has had a unique place in the world, and in some ways we've abandoned that, sometimes proudly abandoned it. Which is also troubling, and the world can't afford that. Chair Brady talked about bad leadership the past couple of years. I think President Biden he assembled an amazing coalition on Ukraine and helped educate European allies as to why he was going to do what he was going to try to do, and it went as well as it could given the tragedies of an increasingly aggressive Russia, which feels entirely emboldened by how President Trump treated them. Which, by the way, has a domino effect throughout all of Asia, including China now, who we see is acting in certain ways. Whether it's that, the expansion of NATO, Afghanistan, Chair Brady mentioned multiple times in this interview, that was a plan and a pledge from President Trump. Now, we can talk about the wisdom of the war in Afghanistan over time and how it went and why we were there and when we should have leave, or all kinds of things like that. But the idea of President Trump committing to a path and President Biden ultimately fulfilling the idea that we should not be there anymore and doing the best we could to extract ourselves from a tragic situation, and indeed, as is not a surprise, comes with additional tragedies. That's something that had happened on President Trump's watch, frankly. And the idea then of Afghanistan, which has always represented a nexus of very, very complicated international politics. My point is simply that third wish of the lamp, Professor, would be for for America to step up again and help lead an international order that is not only good for international economics and business, but also for human rights across the globe, for combating the existential threat of climate change across the globe. America has to lead in that way. We need to bring India and China along, in particular with regard to climate change. This is complicated stuff that they have a chance to develop as well, but in a way that does not end up being the icing on the cake of environmental degradation, right? Europe and America caused so much of the problem. China, India want a chance to grow. Fine, let's sort this out in a way that enables people to do that. You only can achieve all of that and more if you have a strong international order led by America. And unfortunately, over the past several years, the Republican Party, in many instances, has gleefully allowed that order to degrade. We've got to get it back, and I think President Biden has done a good job with some of those elements. But that would be my third wish.
It appears that both of you agree on one thing, that policy should be made based on reality and not ideology. I know, Chairman Brady, you want to jump in, but I think we are running out of time.
Right.
I did not want to bring in foreign policy, but this has been a fantastic debate, fantastic conversation. I thank you both for being on the show, but being so candid, so honest, and so respectful. I mean, you both have manifest the best of American democracy and American public discourse. I would like to invite you both again and just focus on foreign policy, since both of you have been chomping at the bit to discuss foreign policy, and I have assiduously avoided that, at least in this discussion, because I wanted to talk about the midterm elections. I want to thank both of you, and I also want to thank all of our viewers. If you have not subscribed to Khanversations, please do that. And if you have any suggestions on how I can improve these kind of discussions, please do so in the comments. And once again, thank you very much to the Republican Party's chairperson, Judge Jane Brady, and thank you very much for one of the leaders of the Democratic Party, Senator Bryan Townsend. Thank you for being on Khanversations.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you, Chairwoman. Thank you.